Good day, everybody. Welcome to the podcast. This is episode 22, where we find out what's on your workbench. I'm not really sure what was going on with my voice during that. But anyway, my name's Andrew with CraftyBeetroot.com. And as always, we have the infutable Chili from Orewood Solutions. Chili, how are you doing?
I'm just dandy, but I am wondering if we can do a slight redo there from you. I want to get that really good, enthusiastic, archetypal Australian g'day.
G'day, everybody out there. Crikey bike. I'm not really sure what was going on with my voice during that. But anyway, my name's Andrew with CraftyBeetroot.com. And as always, we have the infutable Chili from Orewood Solutions. Chili, how are you doing?
I'm just dandy, but I am wondering if we can do a slight redo there from you. I want to get that really good, enthusiastic, archetypal Australian g'day.
G'day, everybody out there. Crikey bike.
Yeah, that's better.
The worst part is my children actually sound like that now. They had this nice Oklahoman twang where they'd be like, stay here. And now they're like, the peel. And it's like, oh my goodness.
Yeah, it's much better than the Oklahoma twang.
I guess it depends on the listener. But anyway, enough about accents. How are you doing and how's it going? I know a little bit about what you've been working on. I think it's similar to the last few weeks, but how you been?
Been good. Been able to go enjoy at least some outdoor activities before all of the California wildfire smoke blows in every day.
Is it that time of the year, is it?
Yep. But we've had good mornings, so able to go enjoy the outdoors and then come back into the shop refreshed and get some stuff done.
How does it get over the mountains, or does it just kind of work its way through?
It just permeates everything. There is no safety. Yeah, and it's all ground level smoke, so it's not very high up. And the problem that really causes is that those particles, when they interact with emissions from vehicles and manufacturing, and are exposed to sunlight, of which we have a ton in Colorado because we're high up and we have really clear days.
You're about 4 inches from it up there.
Yeah, it turns into what's called ground level ozone. So that awesome layer of our atmosphere that protects us from from UV rays and things like that is great when it's up high. When it's down low, it's poisonous to your lungs.
Yep, and greenhouse gas, and it's actually quite bad stuff when it's not where it's supposed to be. So,
yeah.
Oh, fun. Are you guys like restricted to basically trying to stay indoors, or is it just not quite that bad yet?
It depends on the day. But it'll either be, we either get an alert that it's unhealthy for sensitive groups, so if you have asthma or COPD or something like that, it's recommended you stay indoors. And then we have some days that are just like, you should all stay inside because it's bad out.
Yeah, I can imagine. We had, for us, it was a couple of years back when we had a bunch of fires, and it was the schools wouldn't let kids outside and stuff like that. It's not fun. You guys seem to be going through it every year now, which is unfortunate. So
yeah, the nice thing is there aren't really fires here in the state, so it's not like raining ash outside like it was last year.
That's even more fun.
Yeah when you have half burnt pine needles raining on your car, that's when you know it's getting apocalyptic.
The sun's red and everything's red outside. Oh yeah, that brings back memories. So anyway, let's jump right to it. What's on your workbench?
Yeah, so I've been spending time out in the garage some more and getting things ready on my Chevelle to potentially sell it and fund the holy grail project of building the wood-bodied car.
Yep.
So I did some stuff, like we talked about earlier. I put a radio in it, did some work on a gas tank, doing some stuff like that. And now
Oh, look at that.
what I'm doing is working on the exterior. So for those of you who are watching this on YouTube, you'll be able to see, but I am working on polishing the paint. So you'll hear this referred to multiple different ways from different people as polishing or cut and buff, whatever. It's all the same process. This car has a really awesome paint job on it, but it was never completed. Okay. Because the folks who did the paint job, it was a high schooler who was driving it, and they're like, it's going to get scratches and dings and stuff, so we'll just, when he's done driving it, then we'll finish the paint job, and it'll look really good. So this is a rear fender, and you can see this is before I've done anything to it. Oh, wow. It doesn't look bad. It's not, horrible, but if you look in the reflections, like you look at, that's my wife's car in the reflection, you can see it, but it's not like super clear. It's a little fuzzy in the reflection. And so what I'm working on doing, actually what I've done now, I'm complete with this, but I'm going through a process of cleaning up the clear coat, which is the top coat. Yep. So it takes out minor scratches, minor, discrepancies in that top coat to create a really smooth, clean finish that honestly from 20 feet away you're probably not going to notice any difference, but when you get up close and you start to look, here's after, and let me scoot further out of the way. Have fun figuring out where the car ends and where the reflection ends and the real world begins. Wow. So you can see, let's see this right here. Yeah. This is the edge of the car. That's where the reflection point starts. That's the real compressor. That's the reflection of the compressor.
Wow.
So
that's shiny.
Yeah, it's no joke when people talk about putting a mirror finish on a paint job. If you do the work, which is a lot, you really can get a reflective surface, especially on dark paint colors. Yeah. That is almost impossible to tell where the vehicle ends and the real world begins. When you do this on a black paint job, like black paint is the worst. I mean, because it is every tiny little defect, ripple, anything is instantly visible. But a perfect black paint job, if I took a shot like this over black paint, it's a complete, it messes with your mind because you cannot differentiate the picture, the reflection from reality. It's really awesome. But it is an incredibly labor-intense process.
Yep. I can imagine, considering my car gets washed once every 2 years, year. Yeah, that's
washed once every 2 years.
Yeah, something like that.
Oh man, you just killed me inside.
Good, it's nice and dry here. It's fine.
Yeah, you don't have to contend with road salt and stuff like that too.
Yeah, and then if I keep it too clean, then it shows up all of the scrapes and dings from me and my wife driving it when we first got it, and didn't realize that in Australia, a Subaru Outback is considered a massive car. When we came from the US, and it was like a Subaru Outback was a reasonable sized car, and parking spaces weren't quite, and depth perception weren't quite dialed in. So, but anyway, no, I can definitely appreciate it. I know that, again, diverting to my kind of background with the props, a lot of people, when they're going for like that shiny Mandalorian armor, or they're trying to make a Terminator 2 or something where it's chromed and they don't want to chrome it, they'll go through that basically the exact same process, with the buff and the polish and getting it up. So I guess walk us through the process, because I am curious, because I know the polish where you spray it on out of the nozzle, out of the the car wash, and you go, yep, it's polished, it's good.
Yeah.
I'll see you in a year.
So yeah, that is that process is a wax process. And what waxing does is it protects the paint. So you're adding protection from weather elements as well as UV protection, which is probably the most damaging thing to paint is UV. And that's the very, very last step. And a step you can do fairly easily as a maintenance routine. So as often as you wash your car, in that 2-year time frame, I wax my car probably 2 or 3 times, just to keep it protected. But where I started in this process was, like I said, it was kind of halfway through an entire paint process. So the color and the clear coat had already been shot, and it had been to a degree wet sanded, which what wet sanding does is it takes the texture out of the paint job. So even with the very best setup, best spray booth, high quality paints, once you get done spraying your last clear, you will have some degree of what's called orange peel, which is just like it sounds, the texture of an outside of an orange. That's what the texture will be on a paint job. So the way you knock that down is with sandpaper. But unlike working with wood, you're going to start at like a 400 grit.
Oh, you're not starting at like an 80 or a 60?
No, you're starting, your quick cut is 400 grit. And it's a paper that's on a specific kind of backing, which will hold up to being wet.
Yeah.
So you go through, generally you'll go through 400, 1200, 2000 and 4000 grits to get a really nice, clean, even surface. And the reason you wet sand is because the water adds not only a lubricant to the surface to keep you from marring and scratching the surface, but it also washes away debris. So you don't have buildup of paint or clear coat, on your sandpaper. You're not clogging it, which will actually damage the paint. It sounds kind of crazy, but it will do damage. So you want to get that stuff flushed away as you're releasing it from the surface. So there was a wet sanding process done in this car. Not going to say it was the best. But I chose not to redo that at all, because this is a driver. It's not a show car. So it doesn't matter if it is 100% ridiculous perfection. So I picked up from that wet sanding, and your first step after that is you start going through polishes, and polishes come in a massive, obnoxious, ridiculous variety of forms. Everybody has their own favorite brands and levels of grit. It's preposterous, and it's as much of an art as it is a science, really, because the one variable in it is you, the person doing the work, and how your body mechanics work. So when you polish a car, you have to find the right combination of polishes and pads that fit your body mechanics and how you work.
Okay.
So for me, I went through the whole car with what's called a wool pad first. So it is a man-made microfiber, the one I have, but it's almost like shag carpet. Like it's, got long texture to it. And I used a more aggressive grit polish. The one I have actually is manufactured to break down. So,
Okay.
so it's, as you use it, it starts with more aggressive particles that break down into a polish.
Yep.
And that takes out large scratches. And when I say large, I mean you can only see these scratches under the right light.
Yep.
With, you know, the right angle.
Yeah.
But those are considered large. So you take all those out. And then you wash the car down again to make sure you have any residual off of it. Then I went back over it again with a finer polish and a foam pad
Yep.
that has a lot less texture to it. And that is what takes it from a smooth, consistent surface to a mirrored finish.
Okay.
And you're working really small areas at a time, and it's really time consuming. But it's the more time you put into it, the more you're going to be happy with it. And only once you get done with that process, then do you go over it with a wax to seal everything in, keep the elements out, keep it UV protected, and keep it looking nice for a long time. Nice.
Yes, I can safely say that I've never done any of that on a car ever.
Yeah. It's not fun. It's great work if you're a masochist. It's punishing, and your body's in weird positions a lot of the time to try to get, you know, all the angles of a car. Especially on, working on newer cars doing this, when you've got crazy angles on the underside of doors, it's hard. And the more curvaceous a vehicle is, the harder it is too, because it's really easy to strip all the way through to the paint, or even through the paint if you're not paying attention. And when you're on a corner, or a rounded surface, it's a lot easier to do that. I mean, you got to keep a constant motion to make sure you're getting even coverage. And that's part of why you work on a very small area at a time. The other is just because you don't want to spread the product out too thin. It'll dry too fast.
Yeah.
And then when that product's dry, it'll actually damage the paint instead of, work it.
Yeah, and I bet you realize how big a car really is during this process.
Yeah, this is a 1966 Chevelle. So the trunk alone is about the size of a smart car. It is enormous. It's every bit as much a surface as if I were to do this to my full-size Ram 1500.
Yep. Yeah. So that is a lot of work. I'll have to explain that to my father, who's just got his work done on his car, and be like, so you need to do this process now. And he'll probably be like, no, it's good enough.
My only saving grace is that this thing has a vinyl top on it, so I didn't have to do the roof.
Nice. Yeah, that would.
But that was a whole different process to, clean, revive, and protect that vinyl.
Yeah. Yeah, you want to make sure you protect that.
Yep.
No, very good.
So my shoulders hurt is basically what I'm saying.
So you're an expert in karate now. Excellent.
Yeah. It's thankfully I've got a power DA buffer.
Okay. I was going to ask if there's a power system that'll help that, but I mean, obviously then you've got the risk of going through or not getting it even.
Yeah, and the issue with a power buffer really is you have to select your speed on it. A good DA, you'll have adjustable speed. And so generally, as you're working those higher grits, you're going to be at a higher RPM.
Okay.
So for instance, mine has an adjustment from 0 to 10 is what my adjustment is. So on that first pad, the woolly pad with the more aggressive grit, I go at about a 6.5 to cut that down. Then when I switch to the foam pad, I knock it down to about a 5.
Okay.
And then for polishing or for waxing, I'm at about a 3.
Makes sense.
And there's kind of there isn't any one exact number. It depends on the project you're using, on the pads you're using, and again, your body mechanics, to determine really where you want that set.
So how long did that take you to do that process? How many kind of man hours, roughly?
The first cut was probably about 6 hours.
Okay.
The second was probably about 4, and the wax was only about an hour.
Okay, so a good couple days, kind of.
Yeah, it's definitely labor intensive, and that's why one, it's expensive to get done. If you go have an exterior detail done on your car, it's a pretty similar process, and it's going to cost you, at a good place, it's going to cost you $400 or $500 to get that done. That's because it takes a lot of time.
Yeah, and
even people who are really good, there's just no speeding up the process.
Yeah, and I mean, there's just not, because not everybody's doing it. There's less people, so there's less expertise out there, and you got to pay for those people to do it.
Yeah, but that's that gives you an idea of kind of what goes into these people with show cars, because this isn't even a process that is done on a new car.
No
Not
way.
even close. They're baking their paint in an oven after it's sprayed, which helps not only speed up the dry time, but give you a more consistent surface and do away with a lot of that orange peel. But they're not cutting and buffing, and that's something that'll happen, down the road. Somebody who buys a nice car and really wants to trick it out, that's gonna be one of the first things they do, is either hire somebody or do it themselves to, cut and buff that paint and make it really shine. And it makes a huge difference on a car. When you see crisp reflections in a car, your brain perceives it entirely different.
Yep. Yeah. This is why I'm thinking about if we've got that combi van sitting there, and it's like thinking maybe I should go get an old bike and then do up an old bike, because then I've just got a fuel tank I need to do that whole process on.
Yeah, that's I would not start there. Fuel tank on a bike is one of the hardest things to paint and prep, because it's not quite spherical, but it's rounded the whole way. So in painting, even in your prep to paint, when you do that guide coat and you're trying to smooth stuff out, it is so friggin' hard to not wear through anywhere. Then when you get that and you start to lay down primer and paint, it is super difficult to not get drips. You got to be good. And same goes for fenders. Then again, when you get to the cut and polish stage after that, it's back to the same problems you had with, your prep work. It's really hard not to wear through.
Oh, there's that plan.
Yeah.
Before it was even formed.
If you're into pain, and doing things over and over again, by all means, go for it. Do it. I'm a huge proponent of just, grab it and try. Yeah. But if you want to for those who want to take a more methodical approach to it, and learning this craft, really the best thing to do is to get some scrap steel, sheet steel or plate steel. And I'm a big fan of getting scrap. If it is rusty and looks like crap, awesome. That's what you want, because then you're going to learn about how to clean material and how to do a skim coat of body filler to fill all those tiny imperfections and get you a perfectly flat, smooth surface. Then you can go through the painting on a flat surface and learn what that's like, learn about the cut and buff, and get some practice reps in with all of the stages on a fairly easy piece of metal that you're not going to care if you wear through anywhere. If the whole thing isn't perfect, who cares? It's about learning.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm not going to do that.
That's why I said for those who want to. I know that's not your approach.
just gonna be honest. I'm like, that sounds great, but
I'm just gonna shake up that rattle can and go.
Yeah, just get it done. Perfection is the enemy of done. That's how I roll.
Yeah. Well, you can always take the professional's cheater route, which is to spray a matte finish, because matte finish hides everything.
Yep. Do a vinyl wrap. There we go. Done.
Yeah, vinyl wrap. There you go. Actually, interestingly, on really high-end cars where this process is done, out of the factory, and I'm talking like McLarens, Bugattis, Ferraris, a lot of people who buy those cars, one of the first things they do with it is they put a wrap on it.
Yep.
And a lot of guys, a lot of girls will put a wrap in the exact same color. But the reason for that is that vinyl decal protects the original paint. So when you go to sell it down the road, you can strip that vinyl off and you have a brand new car all over again.
Yep. Yeah, the vinyl, you can do whatever you want, and it's a lot cheaper than getting it repainted.
Oh yeah, and those wraps have come down in price so much. And it's, I mean, you're protecting the investment you've put in that kind of vehicle.
Yeah. And you still get to drive it around.
Yeah.
Which is the best, which is why would you have that and not drive it? I don't understand, but I'm not in my position, so I don't know.
Yeah, I will never garner as much joy from looking at a vehicle as I will getting behind the wheel and trying not to wreck it.
Yeah. Yeah, having that thought when you get back going, oh, that could have gone very badly. Oh well, it's all good.
Yeah. I took a couple ladies out a couple weeks ago in the Chevelle because I just finished painting the wheels, and it was some of our quilter ladies from church, and it was one of their birthdays, and we were out having cupcakes and celebrating, and something came up about the Chevelle, and she said, oh man, my husband and I bought a 67 brand new shortly after we were married. And she's like, I love that car. Like, I felt so important in that car. It was my favorite we've ever had. I said, well, do you want to go for a trip down memory lane? So I took a couple of them out, and they were expecting a cruise around the block. Well, we found some country roads just outside of town and may have passed a few people at about 90 mile an hour.
Nice. I mean, not nice.
Came back and
you were following reasonable.
Just ear to ear.
Nice. Oh, that's awesome. Yep, that's what it's all about.
Yep. So yeah, that's been my madness for the past week. How about you? What have you been up to? What's on your workbench?
My workbench is actually relatively clear. It's still a bit of a mishmash of projects kind of going on at the moment. We had Father's Day here on the weekend. I've been doing work-related busyness and paperwork and stuff related with that. So I haven't had a lot of time. But the one thing that I have started working on, and this is kind of getting back to the whole point of this podcast, is I'm a selfish person and I like having an expert, and I like to be able to ask them questions so then I can completely ignore it and do it however I want to do it. But I'm actually working on, let's go back a little bit. So my kids are getting older and they love riding, right? When you're a kid, your bike is freedom, just like your car is freedom when you're a teenager and in later life. And so they've got bikes and they enjoy riding. Well, it's fine when they're just learning to ride, you can just walk along and keep up with them. But suddenly they get to an age where you can't keep up anymore. So last year for our wedding anniversary, me and my wife, we went and got new bikes. So now we've got bikes, we can go riding places. Well, now that we've got the bikes, we're like, oh, well, we can drive somewhere and go riding, which is fine, except we can't fit the bikes. Well, my bike, especially in the back of the car. So I was like, okay, well, we need to go get a bike rack. So I went and bought a bike rack a couple of weeks ago, and it's all good, can fit in the tow bar, tow hitch at the back, not an issue. The issue is when we go camping, we have our camper trailer. And so the camper trailer is great because it opens up and you get all this space. But the problem is anything you put on the top, you have to remove. Now, again, it's not a big problem if we're going a day's trip somewhere, set up camp, we're there for a week, we leave. It's not an issue, but once a year or once every couple of years, we hope to drive down to Adelaide to see our folks, which is a 2-day drive. Like, there's just no way you can cut it. It's 22 hours of driving. You have to stop somewhere along the way. And obviously in that stop, you've got to open it up. So anything that's on top of the trailer, you've got to take off, and then you've got to repack it in the morning and then get on the road and drive 12 hours. So the plan is to whatever I do on the trailer, I want to make it so that I don't have to unpack everything. Or if it is an unpack, it's a quick, undo a latch, pops off. I can get the tent set up and get the bed set up and everything. And so the plan is to modify this bike rack from being just a tow hitch option to actually having something that I can mount on the side of the trailer that I can then flip up out of the way, open up the trailer, and then when the day's done, fold it up, flip it back down, lock it in place, and off we go. And so to do that, I need to delve into a skill that I have never played with before. And I know it's something that you know particularly well, and that is the world of welding. So I am hoping, if you don't convince me otherwise that it's a completely ridiculous idea, is to purchase myself a cheap welder and start making some beads on this this weekend. And so basically what I'm planning on doing is this is the structure that the bike rack sits in, and this is the pivot point. And I've taken it off the bit that will hit onto the tow hitch. So so the goal is I can basically, there's a bolt that goes in here, and so if we're not using the trailer, I can put the bolt back in to the tow hitch and I can use it as regularly intended. But then basically I want to have make a system that will basically replace that, and I can put a bolt through, and then it'll fold up for when we're not using it, and then it'll fold down. Now on the side of the trailer, it's already got some like a tie down rack, and that's bolted on in four solid bolts. And so the plan is to basically take that off, take those 4 bolts out, replace it with some tube, and then basically take some bar stock or whatever that's sheet, fold it up.
Flat stock.
Yep. Flat stock. And then basically have it so that will sit like that, basically, and then I'll be able to pivot it up. To start off with, it's just going to be, all weight. There's not going to be any kind of mechanism on it to make it easy, but my goal is eventually to have it so it's got some not shock absorbers, pistons on it to assist, or springs or something. But yeah, so the plan this weekend is to basically bend this up into the shape and then weld it onto this section, so I've got a nice solid piece, and then potentially put some kind of structures on the side to weld that. That's the plan. Now, tell me all the ways that I should be doing it, or better ways to do it, because that's about what I've come up with. And because it will be my first time welding, I'm actually thinking about putting a bolt through the bottom of it, just that way, I will be doing some practice welds, obviously, to start off with. B, I will be, swinging on this thing while we're not driving around. There will be other tie down straps as well. I'm not going to be completely solely relying on my welds. But yeah, so that's kind of what I've got planned as of right now. And the plan is for now, I just want to start off with pretty well the cheapest welder I can get, which it looks like I can get kind of like a DC inverter arc welder. We're up to about 160 amps, seems to be about in that cheap range, and then just use some stick welding of some description in there. That is from my ignorant point of view. That's where I'm coming from. Shower advice.
All right. Let's talk about the machine first. You guys have Harbor Freight there now, don't you?
I don't think so.
Thereof.
We've got a variety of tools.
Okay.
Yeah, and they range from high quality to lower quality. Yeah. So it's not a quite one for one, but
I think if I remember correctly, and this is I'm going off of stuff I read a long time ago here, so bear with me. I think that there is one of the stores you have there that is owned by the same company that owns Harbor Freight.
Yeah,
I believe.
Yeah, well, either way, I could always look up Harbor Freight and find an equivalent.
Yeah, because the reason I say that is because I bought a welder a few years ago now from them. I rolled the dice. Their Chicago electric stuff they carry is garbage. Yep. It's horrible. Stay away from it. But they started carrying this new brand called Vulcan.
Okay.
And I was like, you know what? I'm gonna try it. I'm gonna roll the dice and try it.
Yep.
And it has been a phenomenal machine for what it is. I mean, obviously this is not a, super high end, self-adjusting Lincoln or something like that. Yep. But it's a really solid wire feed MIG welder.
Okay.
And I'm going to recommend to you that you start with a MIG welder.
Okay.
Not a stick or arc welder.
Yep.
The reason for that is that there's a couple fewer variables in MIG welding than there is stick. So when you're running a MIG welder, that wire speed is something you set on the machine and it's a constant.
Okay.
So all you have to worry about is changing how fast you move your hand. When you're arc welding, a stick welder, there is no feed. You're the feed. So not only do you have to worry about how fast you're moving your hand,
you have to be moving,
but you also have to move your hand down as you're moving and maintain the correct gap between the electrode and the work.
That makes sense.
That sucks.
Okay. That makes sense based on the videos I was watching that. Okay.
Yes.
That explains a little bit more in detail what they assumed the dummies would know already.
Yeah. So, I mean, I would poke around a little bit. I don't know if that store is going to carry Vulcan or not. Yeah. But I would look around on some reviews of stuff, and try to find a decent MIG to start with.
Okay.
Now, in that, there's going to be two different kinds of MIG welders, or MIG welding, I should say. One of which is a flux core MIG welder. So that means that in the middle of the wire, there is a core of flux. Which helps, keep the weld the right temperature and keep it, consistent, keep dirt splattered away. So you have good, clean welds. It's okay. But the hardest thing with that is getting quality flux core wire.
Okay.
Not all is created equal in the world of flux core wire, that's for sure.
No, it makes sense.
I really recommend working with gas shielded MIG welding. So that's where you have an inert gas bottle, on the back of it. And that's what's providing the shield around your arc. Instead of that flux doing it from the inside out. So that's one of the reasons I love this Vulcan that I got from Harbor Freight, is that I can do either with that machine. and it's actually set up. I have it set up that instead of using an argon CO2 mixture, which is what's most common for MIG welding, it's a 75-25 mix. I do it with straight CO2.
Okay.
So it changes, some of my settings a little bit, which you have to kind of play with to find. But the nice thing is when that bottle's empty, I go to my nearest, brew supply store, and that's all it is. It's a CO2 bottle from, a kegerator.
Okay.
It's way cheaper.
Yeah.
Way cheaper. And I get beautiful welds out of it just fine.
Okay.
As beautiful as I can do.
Yeah.
So that's number one. Number two is your prep work.
Yep.
Learning how to prep the different joints you're going to do is really big, because it, just from what I've seen there, it looks like you're going to have a couple of fillet welds is what they're called, where you're putting that flat stock on the tube, on the square tube. That crack that you are filling there, that's going to be a fillet weld. And so you're going to have to prep kind of a U shape around that flat stock. You're going to have to get this outside edge and both sides of
so
the
basically there's a valley for it to go into.
And then around that rounded radius of the tube, you'll have to clean that off to get a good connection there. So you'll have that, and then it looks like, if you put gussets on the top of that, those triangular pieces on either side, then you're going to have a different kind of fillet weld where you have a 90-degree connection. So you'll have to prep that surface, and not just the surfaces that are showing, but the metal that touches as well. And then along with those different kinds of welds, you want to make sure you're practicing each of those. Because your hand motion through those welds will be different. And the reason for that is that depending upon how the material is touching each other, those pieces will absorb heat from the weld process differently. So the easiest is a butt joint, where you have two pieces of, let's say, flat stock just butted right up to each other. You're gonna, dress those surfaces, and I put a chamfer on them as well. So I am actually welding in a V, because that helps control my puddle and give me a more consistent weld. But if I put my electrode right in the middle of those two pieces, which, just for information's sake, when I do a butt weld, they're not going to be hard up against each other like that. I'm going to put a gap in between them that is the same width as my wire that I'm welding with. But if I put the electrode right in between and I move it straight down, the heat is going to dissipate into both of those pieces equally. But if I'm doing a fillet weld on a 90-degree, like you're going to do on those gussets, then when I go to run my bead down there, it's going to be going into the edge of this piece and the flat surface of this piece. So this piece is going to absorb heat faster, which means that if I put my electrode right in the crack and go down, then more heat is going into this than is going into the flat surface. And this is assuming that I'm dealing with materials of the same thickness and same material, which is not going to be the case for you. That's why you really want to practice and see.
I've got 3 times as much of what I just showed you to practice on.
So what you're going to do in this case is you're going to do what's called stitching the weld. Which means instead of dragging your hand straight down, you're going to be feathering a little bit back and forth as you go. And you're going to spend more time on the flat surface than you are the edge. So you're going to think almost of dragging along the flat surface and flicking up onto the edge. and that will give you a nice consistent weld.
Too easy. Done.
Yeah,
We'll talk next Friday. It's just like
not a
hot
problem.
glue.
Like you probably won't have a problem getting stuff to stick.
Yeah.
Like you'll be able to stick those pieces together. It's gonna be ugly, and you're gonna have boogers all over the place.
Oh, I'm expecting it.
Yeah. Which, side note, the other nice thing about gas shield instead of the flux core is if you use flux core, then you do have to chip the flux away afterwards, which sucks.
Yep.
So you don't have to do that with gas shield.
Yeah.
So yeah, you'll be able to get stuff to stick.
Yep.
Where welding gets really difficult is one, making welds look it's welds are like knots. I asked the same question of both welds and knots, which is would I take this weld or knot to prom? Because making a knot or a weld look good is what's called dressing the knot or dressing the weld. So I have to stand back and say, would I take this weld to prom? And the other thing is getting perfect structural integrity in your welds. For something like this, that is not the hugest concern, because you're probably going to over-engineer this thing anyways.
Yeah, absolutely.
But when you start talking about the folks who are doing welds in your industry, in oil and gas, or in my previous world of pressure vessels, you're talking about welds that have to pass X-ray tests. And NDE testing that show that this weld is seamless. There are no air gaps in here. It is a perfect continuation of material.
And you haven't damaged any of the material around it while you're doing the weld.
Yeah. Yeah, that's where welding gets very difficult.
Yeah, no, I mean, I kind of view welding as almost like a superpower or witchcraft. It's like, it just opens up another, like the fact you can join metal, which is, a pretty solid material, and you can basically join it however, whenever you want. Obviously there's limitations, but, for the most part, whatever shape you can weld it together, compared to something like wood where you can glue it, but you got to start getting really fancy joints to get that similar strength, while the weld you do get, again, if you do it right, you can get that strength in most of those joints.
Think about going back and strapping on your tunic that you made and going back to that time frame, and you tell somebody that well, what's my superpower? Well, I fuse metal with lightning. You are a god. It's amazing.
They could fuse metal back then. It was just a very, very, very painful process, and they could only do it in like one way. But
you had to use a little assistant pumping some bellows.
Yep, and then a big hammer
and beat the crap out of it
and hope it works.
Yeah, I do it with lightning.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that, again, the schools I went to, we didn't have shop class, and so I think I saw some acetylene welding, or it was almost like torch welding or something. Like, it wasn't even proper, welding. Like, and that's like, I don't even know what it was called, because there's a 24-hour race that the high schools kind of all compete in. I think some of the universities do. We call it pedal pre. It's a 24-hour race, and you basically have to build a pedal car. And I was on that team, and that was the only exposure to any sort of metalwork that I saw growing up. My father did more woodwork at the home. I think he'd done some metalwork, again, when he was at school, but it wasn't something I grew up around. I mean, my grandfather did some farm welding, so don't know if you want to trust that too much, but I mean, it got the job done. So yeah, it's definitely one of those things that I've seen, and it's like, well, if that many people can do it, it's definitely not impossible. But it's definitely one of those skills that, it'll take me a long time to learn to get up to that. But I feel it's time, and it's actually something that my wife is interested in doing. She really wants to try, the wind sculptures, where you get like spoons and tack weld it all onto bikes and wheels and things like that. And
Yeah.
so yeah, it's kind of one of those things that we've been dancing around for a while. And now that I've got a legitimate reason to use one, I'm like, oh, I think we can justify it. So we'll see how that goes.
It'll be fun. And like we said, that idea of putting metal in a in a furnace with flux and hammering it together, that's the oldest style of welding. What you were talking about, torch welding, that's called brazing, which then came after. That's Industrial Revolution kind of welding, where you're heating the metal with a flame to the point where it will take a filler material. It's still very, very common with ferrous metals. Mainly brass and copper. That's where you really see brazing still. Also in some aluminum. That's what radiator repair is brazing. And that that was around for a while before the technology was not just around, but the technology was safe enough really to create arc welding. And then after MIG and TIG welding as well.
Yeah, it's amazing, the welding processes now where they'll just take the two pieces of metal and friction weld it, kind of like they'll manipulate it in such a way that it'll just weld itself. And
there's some crazy stuff out there. They've got specific rod you can use now to braze aluminum without without all the headache that there used to be. You can TIG weld without a TIG welder. I mean, it's crazy. But there's still no, that gets back into that space of the difference between maker and craftsman. You can do it, and there's a place for it, but there's also no denying the incredibleness of somebody sitting down, which I had a tech at my last job that could do this, one of our steam fitters, who could take an aluminum can and cut it in half. So cut this in half, take the top and the bottom, set them together, and TIG weld that together. That is insanely thin material. That's bananas.
I've heard of
but they're that good.
Heard of people doing it with cigarette paper, or like the real fine, like basically people showing off and going, look, I can, like shop teachers doing that kind of stuff where like you said, cut the can in half and go, if you work hard you can do this. Oh wow, can't be that hard. I don't know who would say that. That phrase has been my downfall many a times. How hard could it be? What could go wrong? But anyway, I think I've made the most of this podcast now. I've got my 101 and I feel empowered now to make many mistakes, but I'm excited. Can I proffer one other idea? Yes. Now I know you already have, your material and stuff procured. I'm not suggesting you change that idea because I like it. But where my head went immediately when you said, okay, I've got to move this, to the trailer. What I immediately thought of was mounting a trailer hitch on the back end of the trailer. And the trailer's got to open though, so that has to come out of the way. So what I was devising in my head was basically like a spare tire a pivot on an off-road car. So cut it over here and make a latch, hinge it on this side so that when you get there, you can swing that open, have room to open the top of the carrier, and that's off to the side. That was where my head went with that solution. To be honest, in my mind, there was about 4 different options. I'm sure. And I spent, I think it was Saturday afternoon, I was sick of doing computer work and I was like, no, I'm gonna go out. And I just sat there and I had, this piece of metal and I started moving it, everywhere to try and figure out what I could do. And unfortunately, the solution I've kind of come up with is, a pivot system would work, but I would either have to go and spend $500 on this pivot system that I would then have to modify, or I'd have to kind of come up with it from scratch. And I'm not quite, one pivot point up and down, it's more my speed at the moment, I think. But yeah, I think that was definitely my preferred, like have some kind of pivot system. Because again, if I could have something on top of the trailer that I could just pivot 180 degrees, it'd be out of the way, the weight structures in the same kind of element. Because that's the problem with the pivot, is now this weight is now, depending on where that pivot system is, when it's sitting on the trailer, it's fine. But when it's hanging up, now you've got all this weight hanging off.
Yeah.
So there's definitely going to be some checking in to see if this actually works. But we'll find out. If it doesn't work, I haven't lost anything apart from my time and pride and all of that usual stuff. So
you have to go through the prototyping process though.
Yeah.
If you wait until you have the perfect idea, the perfect design, it'll never happen.
Yeah.
And that's part of the fun of it.
And so much of it is, if you're going to fail fast. Like put it together. Sometimes it's quicker to just put it together, have it not work, and be like, okay, well, that didn't work. Now I'm not spending any more time thinking about that option. Now I know that I'm going to go with something else. And there's something said for that. Like, it's basically, well, sometimes it's quicker to just build it, try it, than it is to sit there and try and, well, this angle and this angle and that angle. And because
especially if you're a very visual learner. There's many projects that I get to the point where I'm like, I just can't conceptualize this any further in my head. I'm losing track of stuff. Like, I just need to get something physically in front of me, and then I can manipulate it and see, okay, well, here's what I've overlooked, here's what I haven't thought of, and make the changes I need to.
Yeah, exactly. So, but with that, where can people find more of you at Chili?
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram at Orewood Solutions, or on YouTube or Facebook. Just search Orewood Solutions, at least for the time being. That'll probably change in the not too distant future. How about you?
So you can find me at CraftyBeetroot.com. Similar on YouTube, search CraftyBeetroot. You will find my videos. If you're looking for the YouTube videos of this podcast, YouTube, What's on Your Workbench. Podcast lives at what'sonyourworkbench.podbean.com, and you should be able to find the podcast on any of your usual podcast suspects, Apple, iTunes, whatever they use these days, Spotify, Podbean, any of those should do it. So with that, we will find out next week how much I burnt. What's on my workbench, or your workbench, on all of our workbenches.